great pleasure to introduce one of my star graduate students, Pamela Montero, who recently successfully defended her dissertation, which she's going to share with you today. Pamela is Peruvian, born in Lima, but was raised and spent much of her life in the Amazonian city of Iquitos in the department of Loretto in northeastern Peru, which is a very large area in Peru known for its very important conservation areas, protected areas, as well as indigenous reserves, as well as in recent years, major infrastructure proposals. And so that is what led Pamela to my attention and the attention of many others here at UF, because in recent years, the University of Florida, through the Tropical Conservation and Development Program, has been in discussions with the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation about governance and infrastructure in the Amazon, or GIA, which led to a large project that we've just concluded, on which Pamela played a major role. The foundation wanted to see investments by UF in 4 large mosaics in the Western Amazon, and Loretto was one of them because of it's a priority area for the reasons I've noted. And that made Pamela a crucial player on the GIA project. Pamela is going to be telling you today about her work on the meaning of community-based tourism, especially as it relates to ecotourism and community-based conservation. She played a major role on GIA with regard to these kinds of activities and how infrastructure might impact them. However, Pamela had one of these lots of different topics and methods dissertations because she also was a key player in GIA and in her dissertation with regard to the use of social network analysis to understand how conservation networks are organized between various kinds of NGOs, government agencies, universities, and of course, indigenous peoples and other traditional peoples and rural populations who we routinely understand now have to come together and find ways to work together. The question is that Pamela is addressing in much of her dissertation is, well, how does that work structurally? And you can see on her share screen that she's going to be presenting some findings in that regard to better understand who's working with whom. So I'm going to stop there because I'm too excited and I would like to hear what Pamela has to tell you about her dissertation. Congratulations, Pamela.
Thank you, Stephen, for that super kind introduction, and thank you everyone who's joining me in the chat in Zoom. So I'm going to start. I'm going to set my timer, otherwise I always like run out of time. And it's a lot of topics, and I really love talking about it, so I need to set my time straight. So we decided for this title of the dissertation, which is Conservation Strategies in the Contemporary Amazon. And as Stephen explained, we examine a broad set of topics. They're actually all of them together and associated because they take place in the same space and sometimes conducted by more or less by the same actors, which is community-based tourism, which was an initial interest of mine, and the networks and actions among conservation organizations. So this is just what I'm going to discuss and share with you today, a brief introduction of basically why all the topics are of interest and why is this relevant. And then the second chapter is about, or the second part is about, I'm going to explain how I conducted a systematic review about community-based tourism. And out of those analysis, I came out with the definition of community-based tourism. In chapter 3 and 4 are more or less similar, but different scales of analysis. So chapter 3 is like a more specific case study about Loretto region and how the conservation organizations collaborate and the conservation actions they implement. And chapter 4 is a comparative analysis in 4 Amazon regions where the GIA project was working. So I used that data, analyze it, and compare it in these 4 mosaics. And chapter 5 is basically a conclusion and some implication of the main findings. And of course, more questions that I had initially have in the beginning of the dissertation. So I will share with you. So like Stephen said, my first interest was trying to understand how all of these things that are taking place in the Amazon are related in what way. And it became more interesting because there are so many shifts right now, so many changes, especially regarding to threats in conservation, like infrastructure projects, policies, climate change. So many things are taking place that also, as those changes take place, they also mean that they have to be changed or shifts in or adaptation, the conservation strategies that are being conducted, it cannot remain the same. They have to be somehow influenced and adapting through those changes or influences from different systems to that specific topic. And also that has like a ripple effect in the diversity in collaborative ties. The more ties you have, is that like something that we were wondering, how does it work among all of these dynamics that are taking place in the Amazon? So there are many ways you can pursue this question, like to address this research question that we had, but I decided to go through the topics that I explained. And also we found this gap in understanding how the collaboration or collaborative ties and conservation actions are taking place among NGOs or are taking place among conservation organizations. We know they work together and we know they work towards conserving and protecting the Amazon, more or less working with the government or indigenous community, but how is that structured and how are they actually working together? It's very little information about that, and especially using social network analysis. So we decided, as we're working with the GIA project, to work with this in this 4 Amazon mosaics, which is in Peru, Bolivia, Brazil, and Colombia. And these regions, they have this distinct histories as a country and as an Amazon region, and also they are facing different challenges and like different and also like common challenges among these countries, and likely distinct strategies to accomplish these goals. So we were highly interested in how this take place. So my first question, because I was really interested how tourism, which is a very worldwide activity and it's taking place in all of these regions, is starting to wonder what is this relationship with conservation. Usually in nature-based destinations, nature is the product, the tourism product. And that is also a goal or a main objective for conservation organization or like conservation offices in the government. But these two elements of conservation and tourism, just in the outside, they seem to be related, but in the core attributes of it, is it like, so that was a question that I had, like, what are the core elements? So I started like, what is actually community-based tourism? Because it has many names and many connotations. So first, I wanted to answer to the question, what are the core elements of the definition of community-based tourism and how is it related to conservation, if any, or in what way is envisioned that? And then the other research questions were related to the conservation organizations in Loretto. Do they share collaborators? Do they share partners they work with? Or do they share similar conservation actions? And the same, the comparative analysis of the 4 regions. Like, do they share the same type of collaborators, the same collaborators, or the same conservation actions? And I'm gonna explain how I address those questions. So the systematic review was main interest because community-based tourism tends to coexist in the same places as either is a relatively well-preserved landscape or is a protected area or conservation unit nearby. So it's somehow related, and conservation, community-based tourism is being used by many conservation organizations as an instrument towards reducing poverty or providing some kind of sustainability. But still, there isn't like very specific how this conservation is related or what are the core attributes for community-based tourism. So I conducted a systematic review. I used 2 main sources of databases, Web of Science and Dimensions. And I adapted this methodology from Moher et al. From 2009. And they go through different filters. And this is basically how I conducted, like first, all the records that could identify the database by inputting community-based tourism. It is itself a compound 3-word. So you can imagine how many papers that may not be related to it were like drawn in that first fish of papers. And then we conducted a filter of removing the duplicates from both databases, and then screen of the records, and the records, we removed the records that were excluded. Then articles and papers that were related to that So we have to review each of the papers and make sure that not only they name it, but they talk about it. So there were some cases that they talk community-based tourism, but within the paper, they never mention it again, or they were talking about something else, or about agricultural or some other things, because community-based can go community-based agriculture to community-based conservation, community-based practices, but not specifically about tourism. And in some cases, they were community-based tourism, and they that ended up describing it all or referring what it is, what they meant it was. So that filter of reading the papers to make sure that we had a definition of what it is, that was the next filter. And then we put all the databases together and then excluded the duplicates in each of the databases. And from that end of the combining both databases, we conducted a full systematic review, and we created a code book, and if anyone's interest, I can share. So we had this parent codes and child codes from the coding. So we got the most common codes found is like the social codes. And we found like 4 big parent codes, social, economic, conservation, and then others that couldn't be like really put out as a category. So I put all the others in the different sections, and 35 child codes. And from those, social were the most prevalent along with economic. And there's specific attributes like the child attributes were also aim to sustainable development, local community participation, managed and owned by local communities, and contributes to conservation. So those were the most common child or specific attributes found in community-based tourism. And we also found that elements of social capital were mentioned in various articles, like there's dialogue, trust, but not specifically mentioned social capital. So it was scattered like all over. So out of this systematic, I'm providing a very fast review because there was a lot more, and content analysis is like a handicraft work. You have to go line by line and have this impeccable code book. So in order for it to work for you, for your research question, otherwise you can get a little lost and never ending coding. Um, so after this analysis, quantitative and qualitative analysis, I came out with the definition of community-based tourism that is brought from this analysis of what are the most used community-based tourism definitions in academia from the database that we examined. And I can read it later, so I'm trying to keep track of my time. But I really like I enjoy a lot conducting this research and examining all different types of definitions that you can have from such a simple word like community-based tourism. Then how is this related with conservation? So now that I had an idea what are the most common attributes that are related to conservation, to community-based tourism, I was like, okay, but what about how is this linked or associated with conservation? So we found 88 codes and 29 articles that attributed to conservation. And basically, in most of the cases, they're just named, like they just mentioned conservation in the form of natural protected area, land and natural management, and related to conservation. So community-based tourism does offer a potential link for communities and conservation because it has a strong social component and recognize the role of local communities in tourism operations as vital, as relevant as stakeholders, not only in conservation, but in tourism development. So this may be an approach for more sustainable and participatory ways of conducting tourism, because conservation is like there. It's not very specific in many cases how conservation can take a main role. Sometimes they just put conservation, like it's an operation that includes protecting landscapes, but not in specific ways. So the potential to further this is great because there are a lot of rural communities that depend greatly on the natural resources that are near them. And tourism may offer pathway towards that, but it's not yet very well explored, neither by the industry or academia yet. There are some like very isolated case studies that proven to be successful, but that's just it. That's like very specific and isolated case study. The replication of those can be very tricky, or finding when things worked that can be useful in other regions is yet to be examined and researched. So my next chapter is more about networks analysis and how NGOs work together. And this is a case study of in the Peruvian Amazon, where I'm from in Loretto, and I have worked this many years. Like Stephen mentioned, it's a very rich and one of the biggest, if not the largest region in the country, and it has a rich system of conservation areas at different levels, private, what we call regional, but in the United States will be like a state, and what is called here federal, we call it central government. So all the different system of protected areas, all of their you see color are different kind of protected areas. They try to form a system. There are different levels of administrations, so it has different level of participation of local communities and different organizations, private and from the government, work in each of these conservation systems along with local community, many of the cases, because forest is not an empty forest, people live in it, and so that's protected areas. So we elaborated or adapted a network assessment from a methodology elaborated by Reed in 2009 that was originally created to examine stakeholders, but we kind of adapted to examine stakeholders and then conduct a network analysis with very specific measures of network, which is density, average degree, and affiliation. And I will talk a little bit more about it. Those are measures that make more sense in this. So first we conducted identifying focal organizations that work and their conservation actions, which is like who works in this region and what activities they conduct. So we have semi-structured interviews with key stakeholders, which is NGOs, main NGOs that work in the region for several years, and also secondary data. We excessively review the websites and reports they had to kind of filter out to and confirm the information they were presenting or complement the information they were presenting, and then we validate it again. That was a back and forth work in this stage. The next one, once that we had all the information, was differentiating between and categorizing organization and conservation action. So now we have the core NGOs. We decided to go through and all the partners they were kind of classifying them into, is this another NGO? Is this a funding agency? Is this government? Is this, I don't know, a private tourism operator? Like try to classify them according to the type of relationship the core NGO had with this partner. And the same thing with the actions. They conducted all these different conservation actions in the area, so we try to classify them. And so that's part of the categorizing, and we elaborated matrices, and which led us to the next stage, which is investigating relationships. And for that, we use network analysis. So once we had the matrices, we conducted the network analysis and the basic things that we wanted to know, because in network analysis, you can, like in statistics, basically, you can conduct many questions. So I was just trying to keep it very simple with the information that I had, which was the density of the network, the average degree based on the core NGOs, what is the average degree, the average ties that each NGO has, and the affiliation, what the NGO who is affiliated to whom based on the other NGO, how are they, if they share partners or if they share collaborators, and based on that, how are they more likely to be similar. So this is a very basic network analysis of the Loretto Mosaic, the Loretto region. It has, as you can see, a very low density of 0.274, an average degree of 20, let's call it 26, rounding up, and a total ties of 129. So the ties are these arrows, and the average degree is just the average of partners among all the organizations, just to give us an idea, like the average amount of collaborators each NGO has. And the density is like 27% of all the possible ties that could exist. So in other words, this network could be way more dense, but it's a little sparse. And based on the information they collected from the NGOs, these are the type of partners they have. It goes from another NGOs, funding agency, regional government, radio station, other networks, and community-based private organizations, oil company, indigenous organizations, and so forth. The organizations shared by all pairs was what one agency from the central government, which kind of makes sense. If you work in the region, they all have to eventually work with this main big state-based federal, if you want to make a comparison, federal office. In this case, the central government office. And some unique partners they have that did not share with any others was a tourism operator by Organization 5 and a private organization with Organization 2. That means it's a private company that was working with NGO number 2. Also, a network and a radio station, Organization 1, and an oil company and a community-based organization with Organization 3. So I just mentioned this so you have an idea how unique these were, and these partners were like the oil company. Not anyone else worked with another oil company, only Organization 3, or radio station only with Organization 5. This is this is a very sparse network. You can see that all of them is kind of on their own. Even the graphic shows it, and the math behind it, the numbers behind it corroborate that. You can see it's kind of the most visually obvious is like Organization 5. You can see it has its own sets of collaborators. The color light blue, which is like deceiving here because I may be getting daltonic from all these colors, but it's supposed to be like light blue here, the same one. Is a funding agency. So you can also see that each of the key organizations have their own set of, most of them, their own funding agencies. Like we can say their own source of funding, but overall they do not share most of the organizations their work, so they retain their own set of collaborators. They have what further on we call like their own niche of partners and collaborators, and that gave us a lot more questions we had in the beginning. So we did the same with the conservation actions. So we have all of these activities that they conducted in the region, and then we list. Can you hear me again? Okay, yeah, it turns off apparently automatically. We listed all the conservation actions and then conducted a network analysis to see if the NGOs working here were sharing or not, if what conservation actions. And there's a big difference from this network structure that is very sparse to this one that is somehow very dense. And you can see more or less that they use basically the same conservation actions. There are very few that they remain like for on their own that others don't conduct, like Organization 2, for instance, have this tree that's not shared with others, and only this one with this, but most of them, they basically share or use the same type of conservation actions. So that led us to more questions. So overall, the actions that they conduct, they're focused on development of organizational capacity, that is partnership and capacity building for decision making, digital strategy. With this, I mean like all the digital tools that were created, and from capacity building in from drones to satellite images and everything that was digital. And also legal advice and legal advice offices directly working for policies, to advocate for policies. So those were the main activities that you see in the graphic. And then we have natural resource management and protected area establishment. But this is kind of very much the focus of all the 5 organizations, like along those lines, overall conservation governance, with very little difference between them in terms of what they conduct. And we're still working on this. So focal organizations overall share very few collaborators, like you saw in the first graphic. They all have, let's say, their own set of friends that don't share with others. Very few they work together. And the collaborators found in these networks are mainly funding agency. That was the largest amount, the largest number of partners they had. It was the fund agencies. Folk organizations, they do pursue similar conservation strategy, but with different networks. So they use the same similar strategies, probably with their own institutional trait, of course, and with their own set of partners. And in this case, they are dissimilar in their partners. Like we said, they definitely work with different partners, but they are very similar in terms of the actions they use. And this collaboration network in this region is structurally limited by the dispersed links they share because it's very sparse. So it doesn't have this rich and dense connected network. It's not wrong, it's the way the network is structured. And each type of structure, either dense or sparse, have their own strengths and weaknesses. The idea of knowing how your network is structured, especially at the organization level, is that it helps you better how the information flows, how better to create spaces for learning. And it's either like your organization, your network requires more learning spaces or more innovation spaces. So that depends how your network is structured. So the first step is how it is structured. And that's how the first glimpse of this network provided us. So we talk. I talk about this. Now I'm going to go over just some of the questions like came out after, like why these strategies were used most. Was it has to do something with effectiveness? It has to do more with funding available. It has to do more with the context. So there are like more questions related to why these conservation actions were used by all, and it requires then further research, but at least we know how the network in this region is structured and how they are working and what actions are they using. And what action are not using is also important to know. So the chapter 4 is, since we have this like case study of Loretto, we realized we needed more information about the other regions the GEO project was working. And so we conducted the same process of collecting information with interviews and secondary data. But in this case, we have like the sea of options of many conservation actions from all these mosaics. So we use a classification of network ties and conservation actions, and we adopted a classification for these conservation actions called the CMP2. CMP2 is equivalent, so you have different levels of analysis, and you have the first level, which is a broader one. You can see like just the topics, like level 1 land and water management. But at level 2, it has like more specific topics like site and area stewardship and ecosystem natural processes. Or number 6, conservation designation and planning is just a broad topic, but it's level 2 is more specific, like 6.1 protected area designation or acquisition and so forth. So we use this to provide an equivalence so we can compare all of the mosaics. And from that, we also built the matrices and conducted a network analysis. And again, this very simple but yet rich measurements of network analysis, which is density, average degree, and affiliation, that I cannot talk a little bit, so I'm not gonna go over it. So we conducted this. These are the visual representation of the network that is taking place in these mosaics. There is like math and numbers behind them. So we have this first slide of the analysis, the Brazil mosaic and the Bolivian and Brazil mosaic. And they're like very different structure, like on site, but there is also like in numbers, the average degree in Brazil of how many partners each organization has in average was 41. And in the Bolivian and Brazil mosaic was down to 9. So it's like they have very little partners in here. There is like a lot of partners they work with. So in terms of the questions, the focal organizations in the Amazon shared collaborators, there's also just a relatively like a low density, and they don't basically. If we have to straightforward answer this, it's like they don't share the same collaborators. Each main NGO will work on their own and will work with their own set of collaborators. This is very common. Like we examine 4 different regions and we work with 5 in some cases. Like in Bolivia, there were 10 like NGOs, but you won't find in other region like 300 NGOs working. Usually the number of the sample of the even the universe of NGOs won top 100 because it's like really specific regions with specific topics. So this is kind of the average number of NGOs that you will find in a place like this. And again, the same. This like very sparse and basically focal organization, if any, share very few collaborators. And we conducted the same with using the CMP equivalence of the conservation action, like just asking ourselves the same question: do the NGOs in each of these mosaics share the actions? So in the Brazilian, they share some, not many, but in the Peruvian, this is the Brazilian and the Colombian, the four mosaics at the first level of analysis of the CMP, the broader one. So I think it's because also it's the broader classification. You can see there is a lot of sharing because you talk about particular area establishment or particular area designation, and you will find that many somehow work in that broader topic. But when you go into the specific ones, is when you start seeing some differences because you go to more specific levels, like in particular area establishment, exactly what. So you have the more specific. And of course, a more specific analysis will lead you to more specific uh, analysis of the information and kind of seeing better, examining better what conservation actions each NGO is working on and which one not. So in the Bolivian and Brazil mosaic, they do not share a large number of actions. In the Peru mosaic, however, they do share most of the action that we saw in the case study. Even using the equivalence matrix, they still share a lot of the actions. So the pattern of sharing in the Peruvian mosaic, which is the Loretto mosaic, is basically the same. And it's kind of replicated somehow in the other mosaics. They basically do not share, the same actions. But we conducted a very basic, because the sample is so small, right? It's like 5 organizations or 10 organizations per mosaic. So we conducted a very basic correlation analysis. And we wanted to know if the more collaborators in common you have, the more common actions you conduct. But this was not the case. In some cases, there was like not even any correlation at all. And in some cases like the Brazilian mosaic and the Peruvian, it was like slightly negative correlation. So with the more collaborators you share, the less action you have similar. In the worst case scenario, right? Because it's slightly negative correlation, but this is kind of the samples that we work with because there are not 1,000 NGOs or 3,000 NGOs working in a specific mosaic. And this is a result, this is just an approximation of how the network structure corresponding to collaborators and their conservation actions, just an approximation of it. But there are more specific attributes we can input to give us more information. We just have this like very general idea of how these mosaics work and how they are structured with their partners. Now that we have that information, we can input a lot more attributes like we'll discuss in this final chapter. I want to see how long I have so I can, okay. In my timing, I have 20 seconds. So I will speak like as fast as possible. So just to finish this chapter, it just gave us a summary of how the conservation organizations work in the Amazon countries that the GEA project was working. And this NGO, basically, they retain their own set of partners. However, they kind of somehow use the same strategies as the others with their own institutional trait, right? They retain their institutional trait, put in the same type of conservation actions. So there is a potentiality there. There is something that can enhance this. Because what I found in literature where reviewing this collaborative and synergy process is that the industry, the business industry uses this network analysis a lot, conducted this type of examination to enhance or strengthen their learning process, their innovation hubs, and their partnerships. And there is something that as conservation organizations, we have not been using very much. And it's a little ironic because this whole idea of network and this idea of how everything is related come from natural sciences, from studying ecology. and how system works and how everything is related. So he was taking then from natural system to industry to business, and it's been like more used as a tool to develop and furthering and going further. And now it's going back a little into conservation through these tools and analysis. So going back to the first, I'm going to provide like a very fast summary, my conclusions, and of course more questions in the beginning. So like we know, local communities participating in tourism planning is becoming more relevant, not only for tourism development, but conservation as well. It's a trend that has been happening since Rio 92, and sustainable development kind of tripled down all of the um, plans and management and policies and so forth. So it's not going through a stronger trend into including communities, even in activities such as tourism. And I believe that the future research to be more focused in how it could be more effective or effectiveness of community-based tourism related to conservation to include more communities participating in this industry. And conservation organization in Loretto created critical mass for conservation purposes. As you saw in the map that I first saw is showed is this huge and complex network of protected area system that they have not been able to accomplish if all of these partners that are working there will not get together at different levels. So there's something there that worked, and it's still working. Policies are continue being enhanced and strengthened, and participating of local communities is continuing taking place. So the network structure that is taking place is working. So can it be better? Like, can you enhance this? Can you make it stronger, resilient to threats like infrastructure projects? In this specific case in Loreto, all the organizations more or less use the similar actions. So why is that? It's related to effectiveness, learning or information network, staff rotation, and also this conservation organization have modified their strategy. They went from protected area establishment to now a diverse set of other actions, including policy formulation, market-based approaches, capacity building. So why is that? And I put a lot of more questions. I'm going to move forward. And so our findings also suggest that similar actors, that's the NGOs, collaborating can pool their resources and create critical mass for conservation advocacy. That is called collaborative advantage. When you have, let's say, the same type of actors, they're all working together. It's not a competition. One way you can turn this in your favor is they all work together towards the same goal. And there were some really interesting case studies in the GEO project about this, uh, about collaborative advantage and conservation advocacy. And focal organizations that pursue complementary networking strategy, there is synergy in conservation actions, different places with different collaborators. So that's something that seems to work. And this is something I really like while I was reading this. Synergy offers an advantage of collaboration via combining individual perspective, resources, and skills of partners, and its manifestation is partnership actions. Not only we get together, but we do something about it. And one difference that I learned between synergy and collaboration is in synergy, you put something, but you also get something back from it. It's not just collaborating towards something, but either you learn something or you make new partnerships or you accomplish something that you couldn't do by yourself. So that's something that apparently is very interesting for organization and long-term partnerships. And across the Amazons, the conservation organizations were very sparse. Like they were like dense, super dense networks. As you see, they have their own set of their own niche of collaborators. And there is a complex network of collaboration and information exchange related to conservation strategies in the Amazon. That could lead us to elaborate or to better manage the network and to adapt to changes or threats, like I mentioned before. So that's how the knowledge could serve. Like now that you know how it's structured, you can elaborate strategies for better management of this network. So the information flows faster, or the learning process, of course, in a different way, or innovation for conservation development is taking place. It's not getting lost in the network. And these are some of the main activities, and they let us why these actions were more common. And also the focal organization, they use space for synergy with their partners to accomplish collective goals while allowing other focal organizations to do the same elsewhere. That is like they work, but they let other organizations work as well. And there is some space for learning because they're using the same strategies. So where is that learning process taking place? And is it like a formal place? From the information we gather, it's not. Like, we didn't find this is the hub for learning in the Amazon. There isn't a place like that, but it's taking place. And of course, there are opportunities for conservation organizations to create spaces for learning and enhance information sharing. That was one of my main inputs from that. I went like really fast. I think I did it. And this is my last, well, not my last slide, but I want to thank, of course, my amazing chair, Dr. Stephen Peirce, and my super cool co-chair and committee members, Angelica Almeida, Evan Brotman, Jeffrey Johnson, and Bob Bushbaker, that I see him around. I see him in the chat. And the staff of the Environmental Regional Office of Loretto, that they do an incredible job under very tough circumstances with COVID and all. They keep working for conservation. And of course, the conservation NGOs working in the Peruvian Amazon and all across the Amazon basin, the other Amazon countries. The communities that I work on the past few years, El Chino, San Pedro, Damante, 7 de Julio in the regional conservation area of Loretto, Tamisha, Cutahuayo. And my family, my daughter, that is like walking around in the background, Isabella, my mom, my dad, my brother Paco and Vernon, and my friends and colleagues from my first department that I transitioned from the tourism hospitality. I transitioned to SNRE, and I see some of them there. And my beautiful community of TCD student group and my Sambay family in Gainesville. And of course, the school that adopted me later on, SNRE. And all of these institutions that were here believed in me and provided me funding so I can finish the PhD, which I did. Fulbright, the Tourism Hospitality Event Management, the Eric Friedman Tourism Institute, TCD through GIA that believed in me a lot and keep providing me more resources, technical and financial. The Roofer Foundation, UFBI, the Biodiversity Institute, and the School of Natural Resources, of course, and Mission Green and the Tree Foundation. And this is the financial support, and this is the emotional support during these years of my PhD. All of my little family, friends, and mentors. And of course, I had a lot of fun, but it was a lot of work too. But I survived. We all did the PhD. And yeah, thank you so much. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you so much. That was really great, and really, it was fascinating. And my goodness, that is an expansive dissertation. That is something to be proud of for sure. So I think we have about 5 minutes. If anybody has any questions. You see there's a hand up there, Pablo.
Hey, sorry, I don't think that my connection is great to put the camera now, but congratulations, Dr. Montero, that was great. And I wanted to ask you, so you said like in Loretto, there is a lot, all of the organizations have the common ties through institutional organizations and everything, but do they also talk to each other or?
Yes, I mean, yes, I know. It's my understanding, and Bob is here to, and Stephen to support that. Loretto is being like challenging Mosaic to understand because it's very complex. But answering your question, they do talk mainly because the main funding agency make them talk.
Oh.
They have one main common funding agency, and it's very important for the funding agency that the organization is providing money. They talk and coordinate to each other so they don't step over. We want to call it somehow. But it's been challenging for them because it's something that is being forced somehow. However, and this is like, I didn't put it here because it's more like my personal perceptions. They do have informal spaces of sharing information. So they do talk and they do know what everyone is doing and who is working there because it's a small town at the end. Iquitos is like small, so they all know each other and they know what is going on. But formal spaces, they talk very sporadically and because they have to, because of the funding agency, the main one, like makes them collaborate. So I think it could work better. Of course, something always could be better, right? Could be enhanced. So it is working, but I think it could work better. They could have more dynamic space for collaboration and dialogue. They already do, but it should take a little work to think how that could be done.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Pamela, I'll jump in then with my own question that I keep asking you. So in a low density network then, and we've seen some examples of this in your work, and you began to point at this, but I want to push you to say a little bit more. So what would the networking strategy be for conservation partners in a low density network? Do you think it makes sense for them to increase their network ties? Or do you think their existing network strategy can stay the same, and to be more effective, they should do something different to change their effectiveness?
Mm, okay, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. And so when I was started reading about network theory, and I had this vision of there is a structure for good network and there is a bad structure for network. But then the more I read, I realized that's not true. There is no like right or wrong. Is some networks are structured sparse and they have their own strength. So in this case, that they have low density and they're sparse according to network theory. Sparse networks, like for instance, the case that we saw in more specific manner, the Loretto one, they have their own set of partners. That means that they can, that means that they have their specific sources where information comes from. And that is called innovation in network analysis. So you're more likely to have information that others don't. And you somehow enter that new information into the system. So that's one strength of the network. And you have to take care that that innovation doesn't get lost, like leakages, and doesn't take advantage by the entire network. So that's something that the sparse network is good at. It continuously feeds the system with new information. What is not really its strength, pursuing towards a common goal. Since they have very specific ties of collaboration and very few ties in common, when you have to tell them we need to work together on a topic that they are not working or they don't have similar partners, it's very hard for them because they're not structured for it. So you're forcing a structure towards something that is not good at. But if you tell them we need to create a new innovation idea or like something creative working on this, there's very likely that one of them has already worked on that or has information or a partner new for the network, and they can create something new. So when working towards something, this is very interesting because in other networks that are very dense towards a topic, if you provide a common goal, they will all come together towards that, at least faster or better. I mean, that network could work, but you're kind of forcing the structure towards that goal. But an sparse network would likely be more suitable for innovation or creating something new. And I think I put that in some part of my conclusions in the dissertation, that this network is very well suited to create an innovation hub. And without knowing this in the first part, when we were collecting the information, some of the Loretto partners were organically, they were asking for it. They were like, we need a space where we can learn and we need a space for dialogue. Like they were talking about that because they organically or instinctively they sensed like that was something that as a group they needed. And the data showed that as well. The network structure of the Loretto network is very well suited to create something like that, something like an innovation conservation development hub.
Okay, well, thank you again for the presentation. This is wonderful. I'm really glad that I got to hear that.